Welcome to this afternoon's lunchtime talk. Thanks for being here. We've got a nice small group, which means that we'll just be able to do lots of Q&A and discussion on your personal questions and things like that to do with the presentation. So we originally ran this presentation at a Future Fit Homes event based in Cheltenham, which was run by From the Ground Up. The whole event was about retrofitting your home. Our presentation today focuses on sort of building resilience to flooding through high-level schemes, as well as things that you can do as individual homeowners as well. So we'll just do quick introductions then. I'm Lizzie Hall. I'm the Community Project Manager here at Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust. And I project manage our project Waterscapes, which we'll be using as a case study today during our presentation. And this is James.
Hi, yes, I'm James Mogridge. I'm the flood engineer at Cheltenham Borough Council. And that's a bit of a varied role, obviously all flood related, but working closely with other organisations such as the Environment Agency, the County Council, and groups like the Wildlife Trust as well. And it's sort of across like planning, managing flood defences that the council own and maintain, and sort of community schemes and new flood defences as well.
So we're going to today have a little look at the big picture and look at some of the Cheltenham flood risk data that James is in the throes of and provided for us as part of our Waterscapes project when we were initially scoping locations to put in community-led approaches. We're then going to talk a little bit more about the project in detail, what we've achieved over the last 2 years across Cheltenham and Gloucester in the way of sustainable urban drainage systems and other ways of building resilience to community flooding. And then we're going to take a look at a bit more detail about what you can do as individual homeowners on your front doorstep to help within this wider topic. And then we'll have an open Q&A. Because we are a small group, if you do have a burning question and you want to ask it in the middle of the presentation, that's fine. Over to you, James.
Yeah, so I thought just a brief overview of the sort of types of flooding that can occur in Cheltenham and elsewhere. So obviously river flooding is probably the one that people think of most when you think about flooding, especially sort of areas around here like Tewkesbury and Gloucester with the River Severn. In 2007 there were floods that impacted large parts of the country, including Cheltenham, where 50 to 100 properties were flooded in June and then a further 600 in July. Surface water flooding, that's sort of when the sort of urban drainage network can't cope with the heavy, intense rainfall. And we actually had that last year in September. I think Gloucester was affected by that as well. There was sort of a thunderstorm after a hot day in the afternoon. And I suppose with climate change, that's potentially places like Cheltenham and the urban areas of Gloucester that could be more affected, because we might get more and more of these hot days with heavy rainfall. Groundwater flooding, so that can occur particularly in sort of older properties with basements. It doesn't happen so much at the surface in this part of the country, but it can elsewhere. And then sewer flooding is obviously related to surface water flooding, but that can include things like blockages from people flushing things that they shouldn't do down the drain, or even sort of sewers collapsing due to subsidence or impacts in the highway. Reservoir flooding is a type of flooding. It's sort of very low risk because anything sort of designated as a reservoir is sort of highly scrutinised and inspected and maintained, but there is still a risk there. So in Cheltenham, I know there's Dowdeswell Reservoir, which used to be for water supply, but it's now actually used for flood storage. And there's obviously risk maps associated with that in the unlikely event that the reservoir breached. And then there's obviously coastal flooding. That doesn't impact Cheltenham, even with sort of projected sea level rises. Cheltenham's high enough above sea level to that not have an effect, but obviously the River Severn obviously has tidal impacts, so places like Gloucester could be impacted. I suppose in the 2007 floods as well, Cheltenham was impacted by impacts on infrastructure, so like the power outages and water supply. So it was actually flooding elsewhere that may have impacted more people than the flooding in the town itself. Yeah, go to the next slide. So yeah, those not familiar with Cheltenham, I suppose the sort of catchment is quite small, and all the streams and rivers drain east-west towards the River Severn, and it's a very sort of steep slope coming off the Cotswolds edge, a small bit of rural land, and then suddenly you're into the town, which is quite flat. And since 2007 there have been a lot of flood alleviation schemes put in. That's sort of a mix. So sorry, some of them were in place in 2007, but a lot more have gone in. And there's sort of a mix of traditional flood defences like raised flood walls that you can see on the left there. And then there's lots of larger sort of flood storage basins that allow more water into them than they allow out to sort of control the flow. And these kind of most of the time sit above the town centre. Cox's Meadow is probably the most famous one, that's managed by the Environment Agency, and that forms part of the River Chelt flood alleviation scheme, which are these orange marks you can see running through the River Chelt. And then the Borough Council, we do have sort of smaller versions of these, and flood walls as well, sort of dotted around the town. But yeah, obviously you can't rely fully on these, and so yeah, on the next slide, things like these sort of community-based approaches, you know, there might be areas where there's not enough space to put in a large flood defence, or these might sort of complement the flood storage area that's already there, or reduce the amount of flow getting to those flood defences. And I think we'll talk about all of these today, but they include things like rain gardens, natural flood management in the sort of rural sense. Hasn't been done a lot in Cheltenham, although some is planned, but they've done loads of this in Stroud. And all of these concepts are sort of slowing the flow of water through the catchment.
So we're going to introduce the Cheltenham and Gloucester Waterscapes project. So this is a project that is funded by our founding partner, Royal Sun Alliance. Royal Sun Alliance is an insurance company. They previously insured homeowners and individual homes, and during the 2007 floods experienced a lot of claims in the Gloucestershire county area from flooded homes. So they reached out to the Wildlife Trust, which is our umbrella organisation, to get in touch and identify a number of areas across the UK where they could do some helpful flood resilience work through their environmental and social governance teams. So Gloucestershire was identified, and they were put in touch with us to create this project. So they were our founding partner and provided the funds to do so. We've also worked as part of this project with a number of other partners, including the Environment Agency, James and the Cheltenham Borough Council, Gloucester City Council, Gloucestershire County Council, and some businesses as well. So we've done some work with Co-op on one of their properties in Warden Hill in Cheltenham. So this project really looks at having a multi-level approach to building flooding resilience within Cheltenham and Gloucester. So we've done some natural flood management work, which is in our upstream catchment areas, as well as looking at community group work at a community level with parish councils and other community groups, Friends of Parks groups as well. And then we've also done some work with some individual homeowners to really showcase what can be done on your own doorstep. So we've tried to create a diverse range of project outputs and really broaden our reach of this project across these multi-levels. So we're going to have a little look at Warden Hill as one of our area case studies. So Warden Hill was identified as a bit of a problem area for surface water flooding by James. So James, if you can add any more about the map.
Yeah, well, I suppose this is like a national scale map that the EA, the Environment Agency, produce, and so you can check this at any location in the country. That sort of check long-term flood risk service. And I suppose because it's national scale, you sort of have to take the detail with a pinch of salt, but you can tell just from the map that Warden Hill is obviously a high risk surface water flooding area. There are some existing flood defences there, but it's really an area where we need some more of this sort of green, sustainable drainage around the urban area. So when the sort of waterscapes team approached us for locations, this was a sort of obvious choice really, as a location to put a rain garden in.
Yeah, so you'll see the dark blue along here, which is Salisbury Avenue. So the surface water is running down here. So we focused our efforts on Salisbury Avenue. This is the main road through the area. It has the shops, a school, a playground, as well as residential. So it was a good point of call for us to assess it as an area for our outputs. Those of you that have driven past or through Salisbury Avenue will know that there's a co-op there. So we installed a large sunken rain garden outside the co-op. So a rain garden works by taking the surface runoff from a roof, so in this case the co-op shop roof, rather than it going straight down the downpipe into the traditional storm drainage systems. It's diverted into this rain garden, and then it's filtered through multiple different layers of soil and sand, and then it's released back into the usual drainage system. The rain gardens hold and store water, and they slowly release it into the drainage system. So this is key when it's a heavy rainfall event, because it can stop all that water overflowing the traditional drainage systems and running down the road. The layers of soil also help to filter the water out. So rainfall that's falling on a roof will gather up pollutants from the top of the roof. We don't really want that entering into our drainage systems. So rain gardens are a really good way of slowing the flow, but also filtering that water and almost cleaning it before it's released slowly into the drainage system. So this was our largest rain garden to date on the Waterscapes project. We removed approximately 10 tonnes of soil and clay, and we depaved a large area outside the co-op. So we can have a little look at the before and after photo here. So this is the kind of benefit realisation that we're hoping for within our project. It's about depaving areas, reducing the concrete. It helps with urban cooling, and it helps with that slowing the flow and having somewhere for that water to be stored rather than go straight into the drainage system. What we try and do is create as much engagement around our rain gardens as possible. So in this case, we've added benches that were donated by the co-op themselves, as well as the design of this rain garden with a path and lots of different planters in it to encourage people to enjoy it as a garden and not just a functional slow in the flow space. We worked with lots of our GWT volunteers on this project, as well as the Warden Hill Parish Council and a number of staff volunteers from the co-op who came out and helped with our planting as well. So it was a really collaborative effort, and the size of the rain garden as well being our largest, so it's a good showcase for our project. Focusing then on Warden Hill, still along that Salisbury Avenue as the main area we're focusing on, we are inputting a green roofed bus shelter just to add some more biodiversity to the area. Again, they can collect and store rainwater rather than it falling straight onto a traditional bus shelter, and they're really key for supporting pollinators. So the plants that were in there will support passing pollinators as well. So the bus stop has been installed for anyone that's local, but you may not see the green roof on it yet. That's coming at a later date. The final output in our Warden Hill case study is going to be a slightly more complicated green verge. This is the design here. So rather than taking water off a roof building, this green verge is going to divert water off from the actual road. So surface water that's coming down the road on Salisbury Avenue collects all the dirt and grits and oil and petrol spillages that may be along that main sort of commuter route. This is then going to be diverted away from the traditional road drain and into a green verge, which will be planted and have the layers of soil for filtering that water through, holding, storing, slowing the flow before it's released back out into the road drainage system. So this is something that's in train at the moment. There's some photos on the right of sort of what it may look like when it's finished, and this will be installed over the summer months. So Warden Hill is sort of a collaborative parish council community group approach. We've also done a lot of standalone rain gardens at a number of other businesses and areas. This one is at Gloucestershire Royal Hospital in Gloucester. This is right outside the entrance to A&E, so if you're ever on your way in or need somewhere to sit and relax, then you can enjoy this rain garden. We worked with the hospital team and a local artist called Misfire who designed and created our rain slide. So this one you will actually see during rainfall events, the water coming down that rain slide and into the planter. So this one can hold 600 litres of water during a heavy rainfall event. So similarly, we've worked with community centre groups, putting in rain gardens outside of community centre buildings. So these ones will be taking water off the roof of the community centre buildings. And these have all been built and installed with volunteers from those community centres. So it's been a really collaborative approach. As you can see, they're both planter style rain gardens, one with timber, one with a custom built metal tank and a living bench put in on Tuffley on the right there. So this one at Springbank in Cheltenham can store 800 litres of surface water runoff from the roof. So I spoke earlier about us working sort of with individual buildings and community groups, but also looking at some of the bigger interventions that we can do with working with councils and friends of groups at parks. So here's an example of two of those that we've done. So at Naunton Park in Cheltenham, we've put in a swale and a path all the way around the playing fields in Naunton Park. So it's improving accessibility. This park is really local to where I live, and it's really great that when I go now, I see lots more people using that path and being able to play football without the fear of the football fields flooding, as was an issue previously. And we're also protecting the homes that back onto the park all the way along here with this swale. A sort of bigger intervention, and one of the first ones that we worked on as part of this project, is at Plot Court in Gloucester. So you'll see our plans there to put in a number of scrapes and swales to help build a wetland creation, and that was partnered with Gloucester City Council. And again, earlier I mentioned that upstream catchment work, so working upstream to slow the flow before it actually hits residential areas, sort of downstream in catchment areas. So we have that issue here at Robinswood Hill. If you've been here after a heavy rainfall, you'll notice as you drive into the car park, there's quite often water flowing down out of the car park entrance. So as part of this project, we've done a lot of work with our Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust Wilder Landscape team to create some leaky dams up on the hill. So felling some trees and creating obstruction to the flow of water. So you'll see, if you see a pile of logs or trees, that is intentional. It's there to slow a flow route. It may not look on a dry day like it's in an obvious path of a stream, but it's calculated based on where that runoff is coming down from the top of Robinswood Hill. So that's it for kind of community-based schemes and those things that can happen upstream in catchment areas. We're going to talk a bit more now about what you may be able to do as an individual homeowner or in your local, on your local road, about protecting your home if there is flooding, or increasing the resilience if there is to be flooding. James.
Yeah, so I suppose it's kind of can be broken down into three sort of areas as to what you could do to your home, and some of it will depend on what sort of flood risk you might have. So obviously if you feel like that you don't have any flood risk, you might not do a lot of these measures. So flood resistant measures, which is keeping the water out, so things like flood barriers, covers on your air bricks, repointing with water resistant mortar. They're really to keep the water out of the property and obviously reduce the impact of damages. There's also kind of resilience measures, so that might be accepting that the property might flood, but you have things like cabinets and appliances are off the ground, valuables are moved upstairs, and sort of almost making the property more recoverable to a flood should it occur. And then there's also this sort of greening your property aspect, which is similar to those community schemes Lizzie was just talking about, but at a sort of property level. So things like permeable paving on your driveway, water butts to collect the water off roofs, and some people have even done rain gardens at sort of their household level, sort of diverting gutters into a ponded area or a raised planter before it then reconnects to either the sewer or ideally a soakaway, but that will depend on what the sort of soil type is at your property. If we move to the next slide. So I suppose with those flood resistance and resilience measures, it's good to sort of know what's flood risk you have first before deciding if you need that or not. And that might be based on your own local knowledge, but there's also that sort of website that shows surface water flood risk and river flood risk. So for each property, you can enter your address or look at the map, and it will give you a sort of very low, medium or high risk of flooding occurring in a given year. And then if you are concerned, you'd probably consider getting a professional survey done before implementing any measures. And there's a website called the Blue Pages, which is a sort of independent flood directory of products and companies who can do surveys that are kind of all approved. But the greening your property, regardless of your flood risk, we'd obviously recommend doing that to sort of help your community and those further down the hill, I guess.
So within the Waterscapes project, like I said, we wanted to also provide some project outputs for individual homeowners. So we decided to do a series of driveway depaves for residents in Cheltenham Kings. So here's an example before and after. So we used a number of different methods. We identified a road in Cheltenham Kings, which is Cirencester Road. It's sort of the main route through and also has quite high level surface flooding as it rolls down the hill into Cheltenham Kings. So this was really the road that we wanted residents to apply for a depave through our project. So we had a huge number of applicants. So we then did a screening process to identify which residents we would work with. We needed to think about spacing out the driveways to have fuller impact down that road rather than having them grouped at one end of the road. And we were also considering increasing biodiversity and creating a bit of a nature corridor down these driveways as well. So this is the first one. This one before, as you can see, has lots of impermeable surfaces, so similar to the slabs outside the co-op. So these were completely depaved, and then we reused them to create pathways on another driveway because we try and recycle as much as we take out. This property already did have a water butt, but what we've done for them is create a green roofed bin shelter, so a miniature version of the bus shelter in Warden Hill, and we've replaced it with a gravel grid. So it's got a grid below with gravel poured on top, and we've kept a strip of planting so a car can park over it, but there's still some plant life on the driveway as well. This is another before and after. This one again has a concrete driveway that we removed, and we've placed this with smaller interlocking permeable paving. What we've done as well is kept some of the areas of the paving without the paving on top to allow some plant life to come through. So there are ways that you can depave a small amount in your driveway or in your garden without having to sort of invest and do a whole driveway depave. That can still have difference if you're planting along the edges and borders as well. So they did a tile whipping competition. It's quite predominant in Scandinavian countries, where they get residents to take up as much paving as they can at their individual homes, and they compete to find out who or which community has done the most depaving in their area. So that's quite often something that is done just 1 or 2 tiles and planting instead of, but it won't obstruct your ability to park your car and use your driveway, which is what we want. This one as well, this one's slightly different. So this is quite a sloped drive. It may not be as clear that it's sloped in the photos there. So what we've done is we've depaved that front section at the bottom of the slope and put permeable paving in there. So this is a really good way of taking some action on your driveway without having to have the cost and investment of depaving a full double car driveway. So the water will run down that driveway, but then it will filter through that section at the bottom, so it won't go directly onto the road. We've also added in this one a sort of mini pond there connected to the downpipe. So this again stores a bit of water, which you can reuse for watering plants. It also acts as a good place for birds and other wildlife to come and have a drink during the hot summers. This was our final driveway. This one again was a gravel. This one had quite a lot of plants already in the before photo, but an awful lot of concrete, and this one is sloped as well. So here we've reused some of the concrete slabs from one of the initial driveways to create a path, and then we've replaced the concrete with gravel, which is a permeable surface. So we get a lot of questions when we did this talk previously about sort of legislation around putting in impermeable driveways at this point. So am I right in saying it's not legal to put in an impermeable driveway, or you need to seek certain permissions?
Yeah, so you'd need planning permission if it's an impermeable surface. But if it's a surface like those examples that were just shown, like the block paving with the gaps, or gravel, then you wouldn't need planning permission for that. But yeah, anything over 5 metres squared that's impermeable would have to go through planning.
And is that the case for people looking at patio extensions in the back garden, or is it just the public facing front garden?
It just refers to the front garden, I think, in planning. But yeah, I suppose from a flood risk perspective, the back garden could have just as much influence. So would want you to reduce the amount of impermeable area as possible.
So does that get followed through? Has anyone been done?
So good question.
I'm not sure, to be honest. It's yeah, I suppose it's like a planning enforcement issue. But I do feel like they probably don't have the resource to keep up with the amount of driveways you do see, and it does make me wonder, have they applied for that? And
yeah, because I'm in the Grange end of Tuffley, and every front garden seems to be being paved over.
Hmm.
Yeah. And that would be more than 5 square metres. But I'd be very surprised if they've all got planning permission.
It is a bit of an issue of potentially public awareness, but also perhaps contractors just turning up and doing it and leaving. But yeah, it is something that planning enforcement could follow up on, but I feel like they've also got a long list of things, and whether they're a high priority or not, depending on how much staff they've got, I suppose.
If you were replacing an impermeable surface with another impermeable surface, does that still need planning permission then?
That's a good question.
I'm not 100% sure on that, but possibly not, because I think you're not making it worse than what it was before. Yeah.
You're making it better, but you're not making it worse.
No, yeah. Which seems like a bit of a loophole, really, doesn't it?
But yeah, obviously the trend is that a lot of front gardens are getting paved over because car use has increased and people want to park off the street. Obviously the preference would be to keep it as grass, but things like the gravel and block paving with gaps is a lot better if you can do that.
You haven't mentioned grass screen in any of these examples either.
No, it's not.
Anywhere?
We've not used it on the 4 driveways we did. They were a bit of a showcase with the hope that other people in Charlton Kings will sort of decide upon their own back to take some action and use some other methods. So we ran some workshops alongside putting those in and talked about other.
Well, you've got them in your demo.
Yeah, we've got them in. So we didn't particularly, but we only had 4 driveways to work with. Our project budget only stretched so far. So I've kind of covered this, just looking at really small ways that you can improve your driveways with sort of the tile whipping initiative. That's a closer look at our bin shelter. But again, I've covered that. So we put in, like I said, a mini pond and a water butt. So we're going to move in and talk a little bit more about water butts. Does anyone here have a water butt at their home? Yeah, okay.
3.
You've got 3? Amazing. You're the resident expert. Oh, right, in Walden Hill, brilliant. So James is going to talk a little bit about slow draining water butts and smart water butts as well.
Yeah, so obviously water butts do help with flood risk mitigation, but they can often be full at the time it rains, and therefore it's just sort of the same as if the water butt wasn't there. So there are ways you could sort of modify the water butt by making it slow draining. So that in this graphic here, there's a sort of small outlet halfway down the water butt. That's basically sort of active storage. So you have a smaller outlet than what's coming in. So when it rains, it kind of fills and then slowly releases. And you could even have that with a tap if you wanted, and sort of have it filled in the summer, and then in the winter have that tap open. So when it rains, there's always some storage there. Or even if you're just sort of a weather conscious person who's always looking at forecast, you could sort of say, oh, there's some rain on the way, I'll empty my water butt manually and allow it to fill with some fresh water in this upcoming rainfall. So water companies have been using smart water butts. So in the Anglian water region in East Anglia, they've been trialling these smart water butts, and they basically have weather sensors on them. So like I was just saying, with that manual approach, they actually look at the weather forecast, and for a whole sort of area of that town will ping out a message, and it will release the water from those water butts. I'm not sure if Severn Trent have been doing that in Gloucester or Cheltenham at the moment, but they have been looking at things like that across their region. But it's worth checking out their website, Wonderful on Tap, because they quite often run like discounts on water butts, or may target a certain area where they've got concerns with their sewer network, and sort of offer free water butts, particularly these sort of slow draining ones. And there's a good website called Slow the Flow, which is a sort of a charity run website that has sort of how you can do these sort of DIY modifications to your water butt. And I think they also have guides on like creating your own rain garden and other measures, and case studies that people have sent in as well. So it's worth checking out Slow the Flow.
So this is a case study from a family called the Kings who live in Cheltenham. So they started a bit of a retrofit journey a number of years ago, and started small with water butts and things like that. And they've gone on to put in a rainwater harvesting tank underneath their patio. So you can see it's quite a huge tank that's dug down in, and that's what it looks like now. You can just see the drain cover there. So this water is used in their home for flushing toilets, for dishwasher? No?
Washing machine.
Washing
I think,
machine,
yeah.
sorry. And they've had this in for 9 years now, so they were quite early to put this in their retrofit journey. They've noticed a huge reduction in water bills, and they said that at the time it cost them around £3,000 to put in, but the investment has paid off massively. So they are more than happy to talk about rainwater harvesting with anyone local that maybe thinks that this is a good option or a next step. You certainly wouldn't necessarily need to accommodate such a large tank. There's lots of different modular approaches you can take to it. So if anyone wants those contact details, then speak to me after the session and I can put you in touch with them. So I think James has kind of covered this, but there's lots and lots of sort of rain garden kits and water butt kits and things that you can get online, so that you can install things quickly and at relatively low cost initially, especially if you're sort of on your first step of the retrofit journey. So there's lots of links included in this presentation. So again, if anyone wants a copy of the slides with the links, then let us know. James, do you want?
Yeah, I guess just the sort of sustainable drainage systems we've been talking about. It's not just about flood risk management. There's all encompassing with numerous aspects of the sort of climate emergency, but also amenity and sort of health and well-being. We touched on water quality as well. Sort of allowing water to run slowly through the catchment sort of helps with the kind of base flow of streams. Sort of the way we've urbanised catchments means they run off very quickly in a way. So keeping that sort of healthy flow to aquatic ecosystems really helps. So yeah, this is kind of just saying it's not just about flooding. These sort of sustainable measures really help with numerous aspects.
So from the point of view of waterscapes then, so we've just come to the end of our Cheltenham and Gloucester waterscapes project with a couple of outputs still ongoing, but we're really excited because Royal Sun Alliance has continued our funding, so we will be working in Stroud and Tewkesbury for the next 2 years. So we're hoping to do similar interventions, sustainable urban drainage systems, rain gardens, green verges, and we're really looking and hoping to get hold of businesses or community groups that kind of want to be involved. So if anyone knows of anywhere that might be a potential in Stroud or Tewkesbury, or knows of any friends or family that might want to get involved either in volunteering or scoping out a location for us, then we'd be really keen to hear from you, so you can get in touch with GWT directly. So that's kind of it for us today. So we can take sort of open floor questions as well. If anyone wants to come and check the flood risk for their actual home, we can do that on the laptop as well if anyone wants to do that with us.